please give a good welcome. He's come all the way from Newcastle this morning, and here he is, consultant neurologist, Professor Mike Barnes. All yours, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, good morning, and thanks for asking me. It's not a good day to start out. My oldest friend, and I've known from the age of 2, came from Mexico yesterday. We went out drinking last night. It wasn't the best. Having to get up at 5 this morning to get here. You may not see me at my best.
Imagine if you'd gone out using cannabis instead.
Well, that's true. You see, I'm not one of those millennials. I'm also apologising. I seem to be in the medical establishment today, which is also a frightening thought. What am I doing here? Well, my interest in cannabis really started a long time ago now, about 15, even 20 years. I ran multiple sclerosis clinics, and people came and told me they're using cannabis for their MS. And then I began, not in a structured research way, I began to ask people, and well over 50% of people who came to the MS clinics admitted that they were using or had used cannabis. I thought, well, there must be something in this. These people wouldn't use it if it didn't help. And that sparked my interest. That's where it started. And then, I'm sorry to mention the word GW Pharma in this sort of crowd, but nevertheless, in fairness to them, they pushed the cannabis agenda in times when it was very difficult to do so. And I was a bit involved with the Sativex. I signed off the documentation to get Sativex approved. I now have nothing to do with GW Pharma now. They don't pay me anything. I'm quite happy if they do pay me something, but they don't. So what am I talking about today? I'm aware this audience is a very knowledgeable audience, and some of the stuff I'm going to talk to you about you all know, but I'm going to summarise it, and hopefully there's one or two bits you might not know. The first thing I want to mention is this. I know you know it, but it astonishes me that the anti-cannabis brigade, I'll say it's dangerous and it causes all sorts of difficulties and schizophrenia and everything else, and actually every single person out there produces cannabis in their own brain. And people don't think that through. Cannabis is such an awful, evil drug. Well, you're producing it in your head. Everybody is producing it in their head. And we know a lot more now about the natural human endocannabinoid system. I'm not going to turn this into a sort of scientific discussion of that, but suffice it to say, it's a vital part of us living. Just like the dopamine system is vital and a defect in that causes Parkinson's disease, the endocannabinoid system is involved in a whole host of natural functions. And this next slide is just a very quick list. Look at the right-hand side first. Ignore the nerve involvements. It helps metabolism. It helps with energy balance. It has effect on the female reproductive system. It's a stress responsor. It has a function on what's called the autonomic system. That's blood pressure and such like. It has bladder functions. But let alone its nerve brain functions. So you look at that list, just what it's involved in. It's involved in memory. It's involved in motor control, how you walk. Involved in modulation of pain. In neurogenesis, that's formation of new nerves. And neuroplasticity, that's when you've damaged the brain from a stroke or a brain injury. The brain can adapt, so-called plasticity, and the endocannabinoid system is involved in nurturing and developing new neurons. It's involved in temperature regulation, in sleep, in appetite, in social behaviour, and anxiety, and that's not a definitive list. So the endocannabinoid system is involved in all our day-to-day functions, and we only really, in the last 5 years or so, beginning to understand how it's involved. And all cannabis is doing is supplementing, stimulating the natural system that we've got in the brain anyway. So why such a big deal about it? It's there. Anyway, I thought it's worth, and I always mention that at the beginning of the talk, because a lot of people don't know and understand that, I don't think. I know you do, but a lot of people out there don't. When they're critical of cannabis, they don't realise they're actually producing it. I don't need to go through this in much detail for you. You all know about THC and CBD and the balance. I think it's important, though, to mention that the entourage effect, as it's called, and I think it's clear that for those of you knowledgeable and take it, for example, Sativex isn't the be-all and end-all because it's got THC and CBD and it hasn't got the other 98 or so cannabinoids in it. And I think you'd agree that the natural plant
It's
for
full
many
plant
people.
extract. It's full plant extract. Like it's
Yeah.
full plant extract. It has all the cannabinoids.
But the natural
GW
plant.
tried to tell us
Yeah.
that it's just CBD and THC. It's not. It has every cannabinoid in it.
But I think you'd agree that the whole plant is probably more effective than Sativex.
Oh.
And there's something about those 100 other cannabinoids that make a difference to people, I think. And we of course know that THC is psychoactive and CBD generally isn't, and the balance, that THC-CBD ratio is critical. So it's not, again, it's not just one product, it's a whole range of products that we're looking for. Okay. These are the formulations available at the moment in various ways. Sativex you'll know about, and then along came NICE, that group that said, well, it's not cost effective because it's so expensive, and it is very expensive. So it's actually very difficult to get Sativex, even if it suited you, which doesn't suit many people. Even if it did, it's very difficult in England to get it. And we have the first irony is that it's easy to get it in Wales. So the whole thing is bizarre. And of course you can get that THC and CBD, therefore, legally. Nabilone, synthetic THC, is available and prescribable. So they've allowed doctors to prescribe a synthetic compound, but not a natural compound, which is not very logical either. Dronabinol is now, it is available in some parts of the world, but it's another synthetic THC. What a question. Yeah.
Is dronabinol, is it not natural cannabis but grown inside a laboratory, so it's synthetic but not? So I thought dronabinol was synthetic and dronabinol is natural, but they...
Now my understanding, there's Gavin, you might know more about it, and I think dronabinol is synthetic. Confusingly, I digress for a moment. If you go to the Netherlands and buy Bedrocan, it says on the label dronabinol. It is not dronabinol, because Bedrocan is a natural plant product, and dronabinol is not. So I asked the guy who runs Bedrocan at one meeting, and he said for some bizarre reason they have to put dronabinol on the label so it gets to the Netherlands authorities, who then pretend it's synthetic. I mean, it must be one of the only compounds that you can put on the label what it isn't in the bottle. Is that right? That's what he told me. So the whole of this field is riddled with weird things like that. But my understanding is that dronabinol is synthetic and it's not in Bedrocan. Then there's Bedrocan, which is a step forward. It's not the be all and end all, but it comes in, 4 or 5 different varieties and ratios. Seven is it? Thank you. And then there's the whole plant. And then CBD in many countries, not all, is legal. If it's just purely CBD, I gather you've got a tiny percentage of THC, it's illegal. I thought till recently it was 0.02% you could allow, but in fact
Lots of people do.
But it is in fact nothing.
That's right, yeah. The Home Office confirmed to us that they can and will prosecute for trace.
Yeah.
And
then that's
I'll try and have a little chat about that a little bit later.
There you go.
We've been doing a lot of work on it recently.
The whole thing's full of mysteries, and then some people import it and it's impounded by the border force for reasons that are obscure. So the whole field is riddled with weird anomalies. But anyway, the further formulations, my understanding, is what we can and can't do in this country at the moment. Okay, I'm not going to tell you this. You know it. All I would say, medically speaking, is we don't know which is the best way to ingest it. There's not probably a best way. It varies according to the people. Some will prefer to smoke, vape. Some would like to spray. Some prefer to eat it, as we've heard, creams or whatever. Suppositories have very good bioavailability. So there's lots of ways of doing it. It's just purely personal to you. The ratio is personal to you, and how you take it is personal to you. I think people would agree with that. It's really an excuse for me to put up these pictures that I found on the internet. I quite like them. Nothing to say, really. This is the original vape. I don't know where that is. I just came across them. And I like that. It just makes it so normal, doesn't it? Mixed greens and marijuana vinaigrette is, why not? It's. And I like this one as well. I'm sure you do. There's a lot more of these, but I ought to get back onto some sort of scientific relevance. So, after being involved for a little bit on the sort of sidelines, I got a call out of the blue about 18 months ago now from the APPG, which I'm sure you know is the all-party parliamentary group on drug policy reform. And they said, somewhat to my surprise, would I mind reviewing the whole literature on medical cannabis, and could I do it within a month? Which is a typical sort of government response. And I knew a little bit, I think I knew a little bit about the pain side and spasticity, muscle spasm side. And in fairness, I openly admit I didn't really know all about the other indications. I hadn't gone into that scientifically. So it was a big effort, and I should, at this point, give thanks to my daughter, who's a psychologist, who I couldn't do this by myself, so she did some of the side effect parts of that report and the schizophrenia discussion, which I'll come to. But it was a major exercise. It was great fun doing it, actually. It took over my life for that month, and we did it within a month. But it was hopefully a useful review, I found it useful, of the current scientific evidence. And I was very careful here in the report. This is a political document, and I was very careful that we had to be absolutely straightforward about the ranking. There was no point in me saying, well, I think it might work in depression, if there wasn't the evidence, the scientific evidence, at a high level of scientific credibility. There was no point, I didn't think, of saying this might work without the evidence behind it. So some of these recommendations that we found, I'm sure most of this audience won't agree with. But it means, that old phrase, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. It just means the studies haven't been done in some of these indications. So that's what we did. We looked at 20,000, I can't claim I read all 20,000, but we looked at them all and read those that we felt were relevant. And without going into too much detail, we split the evidence up into this categorizing. So scientifically, again, you can argue about it, but a very good, top quality study, randomized. That means you have a blind group, you don't know what people are taking, you have objective outcome measures, and no one can argue that it's not a good quality scientific study. Class 2 is just a little bit less criteria. Class 3 is a study, but not a particularly good one, if you know what I mean. And Class 4 is just a consensus opinion, expert opinion, or something like that. So we rank these studies under those 4 criteria. And arbitrarily, I decided that we call it good evidence if you have at least 2 of those really good quality studies, 2 Class 1 studies. Now, 2 is not enough, you could say. Some would say, well, you need a dozen or more of these to confirm the different ratios and the different dosages and how best to take it in different populations, etc., etc., etc. But we thought that 2 Class 1 studies with a theoretical background and other backup evidence from Class 2, 3, 4 studies would be good evidence. Then you can read for yourself. We thought moderate evidence was just one of those good quality studies. Some evidence was none of those good quality studies, but some lesser criteria, such as Class 3 and 4 studies. And below that, we couldn't make any recommendation. Again, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work for those conditions which I'll come to. It means the evidence scientifically has not yet been produced. So basically, that slide just says we set the bar quite high. There was no point politically, as I said already, in producing something that was a bit woolly, and we think that might work and this might work. We wanted it very firm, evidence-based. So what did we find, in a nutshell? We found good evidence, that's the top quality, for chronic pain. No surprise to you, this lot, but that was by far and away the best evidence. There were 8 Class 1 studies, and a lot of other work on the subject. There's good evidence for Naviximor, that's Sativex, and Nabilone, and Dronabinol, and smoked cannabis in various formulations and various ways of inhaling and ingesting, and for various types of pain. You'll not be surprised to hear neuropathic pain, that's post-nerve pain, post-surgical pain, spasticity pain, cancer pain, arthritic pain, headache, and particularly I'll come to opioid sparing. And we all know that opioids are dangerous, they kill people in this country every day, and cannabis doesn't. So that was the first one. And there's an irony in Ireland, speaking from Ireland, that the Irish government are well ahead of us in many ways, have said not for chronic pain, haven't they? That seems bizarre to me, that the most evidence-based is not going to be one that they're totally supporting. Do you have any up-to-date information on that?
The reason is we make the most opiates per capita in the world. 9 out of 10 of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in Ireland. And that's what
Yeah, we get all that big pharma debate that you'll use less opioids, etc., etc. Anyway, I digress too much. That was one of our 4 good evidence. The second was spasticity, and as you may know, that's muscle spasm, which can be really painful and certainly very disabling. It occurs in any condition of the central nervous system, so multiple sclerosis and brain injury and stroke and a whole load of other neurological conditions can be characterized by muscle spasm, muscle spasticity, and there is good evidence that cannabis in various formulations helps that, and indeed that's the thing that Cytobex has got its license for in this country. People then sometimes confuse the fact that, well, it's got a license for multiple sclerosis, it doesn't work in other conditions. That is nonsense. Spasticity is spasticity, and if you've got spasticity, it helps that. It's just that the studies were done in multiple sclerosis, and the studies weren't done particularly in, for example, brain injury and stroke. That's all. That's 2. The third was the nausea and vomiting. Again, you all know this. Particularly, the studies have been done in the context of chemotherapy, but there's other nausea and vomiting conditions that it helps for, and several different formulations help that. And the Cochrane Review, that's a government, not government, it's a well-recognised body that reviews evidence, and they confirm uses in 23 controlled trials, and you can't get much more evidence from that, frankly. So that was number 3. And number 4 was anxiety, and this was mainly but not exclusively the CBD effect. Again, the studies done in CBD, you may all have different formulations that help your anxiety if you're using it for that, I don't know. But anxiety was good evidence for a CBD effect. There were the 4 things with good evidence, unarguable. Unarguable. No one's actually even tried to argue about that.
I found THC can actually be quite good for anxiety as well. Because
Yeah.
It affects like insomnia,
Yeah.
You have like insomnia, then you get to sleep quicker than you get anxiety.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, remember, these are what the studies have been done on. So I don't disagree with you at all, but the studies haven't been done to a high scientific level on that. Well, let's have a look at the moderate evidence, and I'll go into detail. Appetite stimulation. Again, the studies have been done in the context of HIV. Doesn't mean it doesn't stimulate appetite in other people, with anorexia, for example. Helps sleep disorders, as you said. Fibromyalgia is a very big, under-recognised issue in this country. And PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Again, moderate evidence that it helps those conditions. And then some evidence, remember that wasn't at a very high scientific level yet. Remember, this is even a year ago, and in the last year there's been even more studies on some of these, and this categorization may change, will change, has changed. So agitation and dementia. Epilepsy, now there's some people with epilepsy, that is remarkable. And there's many people, you told me this morning, who have various forms of childhood epilepsy, hundreds of seizures a day, and they can disappear, literally disappear, and certainly go down 70-80%, and get off those nasty anti-epileptics that cause all sorts of side effects. The evidence for that is rapidly improving, and studies being done, particularly in Canada at the moment, and that's going to be marketed as something called Epidiolex, and that's also by GW Pharma at the moment, and that's largely CBD based. Bladder troubles. Bladder frequency of incontinence, and some people, Tourette syndrome, I'm sure I've heard of glaucoma, some aspects of Parkinson's disease. So there's a whole range of things here. That's not surprising. Going back to the first slide about the natural endocannabinoid system and the effect it has across the neurological spectrum, it's not surprisingly that cannabis in its different formulations helps a whole range of conditions. No recommendation, but I do want to emphasize before people start throwing things at me, that it doesn't mean it's no good. It means the scientific evidence is not there at the moment. And that's dystonia, Huntington's disease, brain protection after brain injury. Depression was interesting because the UPA survey, that John and others were involved with, showed that the commonest medical use of cannabis was for depression. Figures were 50% of the users, 50, 60,
38, I think it was.
38%.
And similar for anxiety.
Yeah.
I think that might be because a lot of illnesses,
Yes.
you generate depression from,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
you're probably
yeah.
doing it for
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, exactly. But actually surprising, I was really surprised that there's very few studies of cannabis and depression. I'm not saying it doesn't work at all. It does work, clearly, because otherwise 38% of people using it wouldn't be using it. But the studies aren't there for depression. And on obsessive compulsive disorder. And then there's various gastrointestinal things like Crohn's disease, for example. And then it's a well-known thing that the press keep naming is anti-cancer effects. It does have anti-cancer effects in animal models. It's yet to be shown, except in a few very rare human tumours, to be effective in humans. But I think that will come, frankly. There's a particular sort of brain tumour that's been shown to be helpful called a glioblastoma. And then there's the antipsychotic effects of CBD. You know, THC is psychoactive, CBD is anti-psychoactive, if you like, and I think is going to have a role in the management of psychoses such as schizophrenia. There's a whole range of things out there that is really exciting over the next few years, and like the Oxford initiative, I think is great. You get that to show that it is helpful in these conditions, or some of these conditions. It's going to be great in the next few years. Yeah.
Is there any current studies, trials on autism?
I'm not well, there's nothing convincing published at the moment. I don't know if there's ongoing autism studies. Anyone know the answer to that question? In terms of what's published, there's nothing of much credibility. Doesn't mean it's not going to work, again, like the rest of this list, but not at the moment. Yeah, you got it.
The Academics trial showed marked improvement in cases of autism.
Great, okay, there you go. So, is that going to be published soon?
Yeah, I think they noted it was already published.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, I can add autism to my list as well. This is going to be a very long slide eventually. So these things are going to change, I bet you that.
It'd be quicker to have a list on things it doesn't.
It did, exactly, it would be quicker that way. I'm not going to go to the short-term effects, but probably most of the audience know those. I just wanted the 4 Ds. I think the point of this slide for politicians is actually it's a very well tolerated, compared to most drugs that you can prescribe, it's an incredibly well tolerated compound. And the short-term effects in most people are very mild and very well tolerated. But what the politicians worry about is the long-term effects. And this is the thing that's always rolled out by the Home Office and everyone else, is the schizophrenia. Now, does it exacerbate symptoms in people who already have psychotic illness? Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's why they picked on, at the bottom bullet point I'm going to show is in a moment. You're right. Yes, it probably does. Particularly the high THC, of course, is the psychoactive component. If you've got schizophrenia, or you've got a family history of schizophrenia, it may well trigger a psychotic episode. But in a sense, and I don't mean this rudely to those with schizophrenia, but so what? You know, every drug out there has a whole range of side effects, and doctors have what they call contraindications, and if you're cautious about prescribing it to someone with this condition or that condition. And there's some people you wouldn't prescribe, and I think I, as a doctor, if I was prescribing it, I'd be cautious about prescribing it, particularly to young men with schizophrenia. I wouldn't say I wouldn't prescribe it, but I'd just be cautious, and I'd be very open about that and say this is a bit of a risk to that. But look at the bottom bullet point there. You've got to stop 10,000 light, that's not weight terms, it's not light males, it's light recreational use men, and 29,000 women. There's a sex difference in this. You've got to stop cannabis to prevent 1 case of schizophrenia. One case, that's incredible, really.
Someone else probably knows more about it, but I think GW are doing a study around this now. Something to do with, I don't know if it's schizophrenia or psychosis. Anyone? To look at over lunch break then, I'll come back to that.
Okay. Yeah, so I think we have to be honest about it. It probably does exacerbate schizophrenia. But as I said before, so what? For the benefits in a particular individual could well outweigh that theoretical risk. And that's no reason not to prescribe it. So that's one thing that people throw at you. Then the next thing people throw at you, well, it causes dependency. And yeah, the generally accepted figures is 9%, and 15% dependency on alcohol, and 32% on tobacco. So if you want to look it on that, it's much safer than those. Driving, and people say you couldn't drive. Yeah, sure, you might not be sensible to drive, but there certainly shouldn't be no blanket ban on driving like a lot of other drugs in this country. And again, it's more the THC effect, but it's only the THC effect and not the CBD effect that causes any difficulties with driving.
The Sativex leaflet actually says get used to your dose before you drive. It doesn't recommend you
Yeah, and
drive.
again,
That has THC.
that's reasonable, and they've got to be cautious, these guys. Yeah, it's a reasonable recommendation. Try it out first. If it doesn't affect your driving, fine. Lung cancer. There's no evidence that it causes lung cancer. No evidence. In theory, personally, I wouldn't recommend smoking from the cancer point of view because it's a higher temperature and you get carcinogens at higher temperature, and that theoretically you might risk, if you're a heavy smoker, of getting lung cancer, but no one's proven that as yet. And probably vaping and the other ways are safer, medically speaking. That's all I would say. But there's no evidence that it causes lung cancer at the present time. Effect on cognition, on memory and such like. Some limited evidence. It tends to be short-term effect while you're actually inhaling or ingesting. It doesn't have, as far as we know at the moment or understand, a long-term detriment on cognition. Then there's some evidence that shows that the brain volume, if you take MRI scans in chronic recreational heavy smokers, there's slightly less brain volume in some parts of the brain. That seems to be true. And you say, well, so what? And no one's answered the so what question yet. Does that make any difference? I don't think I want my brain volume shrunk too much, but there's no evidence actually that it does any harm in those people, and it's only in heavy recreational users. So that's an honest appraisal of all the potential long-term effects. And no one's going to say that cannabis in all its format is utterly safe, but it's pretty damn safe. And it helps an awful lot of different conditions. What else? The other thing that you get thrown at you is, if you're going to approve this for medicine, it's going to increase recreational use. And there's bound, whatever way you set it up, there's bound to be some leakage from the medical market into the recreational market. That's life. But actually, in the states now that they're getting, the studies are emerging, those states that introduced medical marijuana policies, there's been no impact on recreational marijuana usage. They may have got it from their granny's prescription, but there's no increase in usage. And indeed, there's some evidence that there is less usage recreationally once you introduce medical marijuana regulation. I don't fully understand why that should be, but nevertheless, that seems to be a statement of fact. Gavin might have more information from the states about that, but it does not increase recreational usage, seems to be the message. And there's no change, for example, in prevalence in the 12 to 25-year age groups following introduction of medical marijuana legislation in the States. So the answer to that concern of our politicians is also no. It doesn't seem to cause that problem, if you see it as a problem. A thing I think we underplay is the opioid. This has got in the press a lot recently, I'm pleased to say. It is an increasing problem. And most of the studies done in the States, not all, there's about 7 per 100,000 population deaths from opioid overdosage each year. That's a lot of people. And that's either deliberate overdosage or accidental overdosage, particularly in the elderly population. So opioids, A, they don't work too well in chronic pain, but they're prescribed in chronic pain, and B, they kill people. Cannabis doesn't. There is no recorded, and again that's a point to emphasise, I'm sure you know, but there is no recorded overdose deaths from marijuana ever. In theory, it's impossible. You certainly have to really try very hard.
And so there is a great video that you can find where someone does literally try really hard. He woke up the next day he was hungry.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's safe, and it will save lives. There's no doubt about that. And the evidence is, the third bullet point there, is that when you introduce medical marijuana legislation and continue opioid usage, you save about 25% of deaths from opioid overdosage. You know, and that's a lot. That's 2 or 3 people per 100,000 population per annum. So in this country, what is that? 200 people, 200 lives will be saved. You want to do it for no other reason. You can save 200 people's lives by introducing medical marijuana legislation.
That's a soundbite.
There you go. Then, politicians being politicians, we have to talk about money. And you do save on drugs. Now, this gets into a difficult area because people say, well, the big pharma's going to come into this and start stopping it happening because there are going to be less epilepsy drugs used and less opioid drugs used. May be true. But it does, nevertheless, written all the politics of that, You introduce marijuana legislation and you save on those drugs, surprisingly. Medicare drug costs reduced by $165 million per annum for analgesic and anti-anxiety drugs only, which would equate to nearly $500 million if all the US adopted such legislation. And that's just savings on drugs not prescribed, because you've introduced cannabis. And then there's the tax revenue. Governments being governments will no doubt want to tax the stuff. And in Colorado, there's nearly $1 billion of marijuana sold with a tax revenue of $135 million. So you could have those, the Brexit bus could go around 350 million.
UPA bus.
The UPA bus, 350 million saved, could be invested in the National Health Service. That's another soundbite. This is real money that's taken out of the hands of the criminal fraternity and into, if the government wants to tax it, into the hands of the tax authorities. Whatever you think of the tax authorities, I think they're probably better than the criminal fraternity, but anyway. So you can generate money from it. If you want nothing to hell with the benefit to people, you can generate money from it, and that's the message the politicians need to hear as well, I think. Okay, so there are, oh, sorry. I'll come back to him in a minute. Should marijuana be legalized for medical use?
Yeah.
Well, that's the right response. Sure, we need more studies, scientifically. Of course we do. For life, we'll need more studies about refining our knowledge and the efficacy and the dose and the right method of ingestion for this condition and that condition. This goes on forever. But legalization will remove the criminalization of disabled people, promote knowledge, generate income, and it would help literally, worldwide, millions of people with many long-term conditions. And so the answer, I think, is very, very clearly yes. And the government at the moment is totally confused. The legislation is a complete mess. The Home Office is just being idiotic, and it really is time that the law was changed. And we are now, as Gavin said, we are now well behind the worldwide trend. Sure, we're going to be ahead of Southeast Asia, and I gave a talk like this in the Philippines recently, where I think you can be hurled into jail and hung, drawn and quartered for even thinking about importing cannabis, but you know, we are well behind Western Europe, for example.
They've actually introduced some medical cannabis next year.
In Philippines?
Yep, so we're behind the regime is maniac. So.
Very good.
The exports is Australia.
Oh, so it was safe given them talking in the Philippines then after all. Okay. So, I'm now going to, there's this guy. I don't think much of Mr. Trump. I didn't maybe a surprise to, but there's one thing only I agree with him, and I thought I'd at least quote. You can hear him say, I can't do a Trump impression, I'm sorry to say, but marijuana is such a big thing. I think medical should happen, right? Don't we agree? I think so. So, there you go. That's one way, the only reason to vote for Trump. And of course, he should go along, but he's one of his predecessors.
Bush.
There you go. So it's got a long history in the States, and I think, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I wish to say. If you wanted that report in its long format, I could just drop me a note, and it's on the APPG website as well. Yeah, somebody, question at the back.
I just wanted to ask a question about how how medical information about cannabis is represented in the media. Because you have people like Peter Hitchens on Sunday Morning Politics talking about birth qualities and things like this, and it's just there was a story recently about how synthetic cannabis spice is basically the same as cannabis, and it's just it just seems like this information is increasing harms, and they're actually a detriment to people's health. So it's just there's things like the programs like Loop as well, where they're testing drugs. And I think Peter Hitchens did make a comment on that, saying that he would rather people take the drugs that are pills that are made of cement or something. It's just it's very frustrating to hear that.
It is very frustrating. There's a lot of just wrong information. It's not just a.
They're dispensing medical advice live to the public, and how would they have the authority to do that? Because they're not Peter Hitchens isn't
No, there needs to be more doctors, I have to say. 80% of the medical community, GPs particularly, would be behind and in favour of legalising cannabis for medical use, 80%. Why the hell don't they stand up and say so more loudly? And we wrote but I agree, we need, sadly, it does need medical backup, as Gavin was saying. I wrote to the Royal Colleges. I couldn't get a reply at all from the Royal College of Paediatricians, the Royal College of Surgeons. The Royal College of Psychiatrists said, no, we don't think we like this because it causes too much mental health problems. The Royal College of Physicians said, no, we're not going to support anything till NICE approve it. And the Royal College of GPs are very supportive, and hopefully will produce an information leaflet for GPs.
Do you find it's more the younger GPs than the older GPs?
Generalise, yes, that's right.
Right tonight.
NICE aren't at the moment interested at all, I'm sorry to say.
Is there any training or knowledge given to these people about the endocannabinoid system?
No.
So,
no. Nothing. And many countries now, Australia is one of them, for example, and others, have produced very good medical educational programs. And it's time, I think, we introduce something in this country. And you could say, well, it's no point at the moment because you can't prescribe it anyway, but you've got to start somewhere. And I think the medical community needs to be educated. And it's just, I think basically, that 20%, I would think, is just pure ignorance. And there may be some people, obviously, out there who are against it for all sorts of reasons. Perhaps they've been involved with people with schizophrenia for many, many years, sure. It's not going to be 100% acceptance, we have to appeal that, but I think if 80% of the people are behind it, getting an educational program for doctors, it could be online, there's plenty of online educational things around the world now, it could be just tweaked for the UK audience, and it would be, I think it's really important.
Can I just ask, if we
Yes.
know and understand that we have the system,
Yeah.
and the doctors and the scientists are aware of it, why on earth would it not be at least taught, not necessarily what it can do or the potential of it, but surely they'd be aware of it? And
You would think, and I think, I mean, I don't know what's taught in every medical school now. I would hope that now something about the endocannabinoid system is taught in the medical schools. It certainly wasn't when I was there, and in fairness, when I was there so long ago, they didn't know it existed. So, but I think that the doctors out there at the moment, the GPs and the consultants, were never taught about it, and therefore probably some don't even know it exists to this day. So it is incredible. It may well be in the medical schools now, but that's going to be a generation till those people with some increased knowledge come through into a senior position. So we need an educational system for doctors now. Yeah.
I just want to add to that, that I've got some friends that study medicine in Manchester and they are teaching the endocannabinoid system.
Yeah, well, I hope they would now, yeah, because it's such a massively important system. But as I say, it's the lack of knowledge in those who were taught even 5 years ago. But it's not criticism because we didn't know much about it at all 5 years ago, and we didn't know it existed 10 years ago. So but we do need to get people up to date now. And there is information out there, but you've got to know where it is, and you've got to want to look at it. The UPA website has some good links to the endocannabinoid system papers and such like. So if people want to find out, there's plenty of ways to find out. But you don't know what you don't know till you don't know it. I don't think that made sense, but you know what I mean.
You don't know what you don't know until you know it.
Yeah, that's it. You know what I'm talking about.
We know, don't worry.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? In which case, I'll shut. Oh, there's one on the back. Yes, sir.
Maybe it's already. It's about within your community amongst other doctors. Interesting to know, how is your opinions seen amongst your community?
I've had no real antagonism actually. I thought I might, because it seems to be such a sort of radical thing. It's not radical at all. But in fairness to my colleagues, I've had no overt criticism. I've had some negative comments on Twitter and such like, which are fun, really. I've been criticising the Daily Mail, which I think is a badge of honour. I'm proud of that. But I've had no one medically say you're talking a lot of nonsense, sit down and shut up. Yet.
I doubt you will.
I doubt you will.
No, I really don't think so, actually. I think we're pushing against open doors.
Yeah.
It's the Home Office has got its door firmly shut.
And the GPs that we see.
And yeah, but there are some negative. Yeah.
In your opinion, as we're all here in this room, what can we do, in your opinion, to help? I know we're in the UPA and such, but is there anything we can go away today and do in terms of contacting NICE and backing up what you're saying?
It's very good, and because to know what to do for the best. The evidence, the scientific evidence is there. So I don't think we have to say, well, of course we need what I've been saying through this talk. But the scientific evidence, I think, is sufficient to get a schedule changed. And that's all we're asking for, really, is to change the scheduling. Is there. So it comes down to, I think it comes down to politics, pure politics. And that's, the traditional ways of affecting the politicians. Asking them nicely, getting your MP on side, writing to them, getting questions asked in Parliament, protests,
The things that we're doing.
The things you're doing, basically. I really think it will change, it will happen. I don't think it'll happen in this Parliament because it's the wrong Parliament and they're too obsessed with Brexit and all sorts of things, but it will happen. It's a matter of keeping going, and I think what the UPA does is a great job. It just needs to do more of it and louder.
That's it.
Do you think the American Class 1, because they've got it listed as a Class 1 drug, once their federal laws change, do you think we'll follow suit here in the UK? Because that's generally what happens.
I would hope so. I would hope so. The law in this country is riddled with so many anomalies. Like someone from Holland can go, I think I'm right legally, let me test out here. You can someone in Holland can be legally prescribed, they can come to this country on holiday with their stuff.
Yes, that's right. 30 days worth.
Ridiculous. If I go to Holland, I can buy it perfectly legally in Holland, and I can't bring it back in this country.
That's right.
But I can use synthetic, I can use Sadivex, which is related, let's say that. And, it's the whole thing's crazy.
Yeah,
and it really is time, this craziness in law. And the thing that really is the scheduling of no medicinal value is just utter nonsense. And one of these days, somebody in the Home Office has got to realise that.
So, have you seen about the young girl who wants to sue, I think it's the US government, for not listening to the evidence? Would you think that was maybe a wise idea, taking the evidence and someone on
I don't know, lawyers in the audience might know better than I would about that. The trouble with taking legal action like is incredibly expensive. And if the Home Office is so inclined, they've got bottomless pits to endless numbers of QCs on their side. So I don't know. I would think it may succeed, but it could be a very, very expensive way of doing it. Don't know.
Thank you.